JPMorgan just published a paper called Patchmageddon. Not a security vendor, not a threat intel shop, a bank. It came out July 22nd as a special issue of their Eye on the Market series, written by Michael Sembalest, their chairman of the market and investment strategy, with contributions from their global CISO and their head of cyber operations. And the argument in it is one I've been making on this channel for over a year. They open with a tornado analogy. Before the late 1940s, the United States had no public tornado warnings. Once the Weather Bureau started issuing them, tornado deaths per million fell 90%, even though the average warning is only 15 minutes. Their point is that a disclosed vulnerability and its patch are the tornado warning, and the time you have to act on that warning has collapsed to almost nothing. Let me walk through what the paper actually found, what has changed to cause it, where the honest counterweight is, and what I think organizations should be doing about it. Here's the core of what they found, and the numbers are stark. The average time between the disclosure of a vulnerability and the first exploitation has fallen to a single day. They cite the zero-day clock, showing median time to exploitation dropping from roughly 1 year in 2021 to 1 day in 2026, projected to fall to 1 minute by 2027. The share of exploitations happening on or before the day of disclosure has risen to almost 80%. Think about that. In most cases now, the attack is already underway by the time you hear about the flaw. Then there is the patch gap. In 2025, according to data they pulled from Mitiga, over 48,000 common vulnerabilities were disclosed and only about 7,500 were patched over the same window. Disclosure is climbing a steep curve and patching is crawling along the bottom. And the two lines have crossed. There is a chart in the paper from Sidero Labs showing attacker time to exploit versus organization mean time to remediate. The organization line is rising toward 95 days. The attacker line has dropped below zero. Below zero means the exploit exists before the patch does. One more number that should stop every practitioner. In about 60% of breaches, a patch was already available at the time of the compromise. This is not primarily a discovery problem. It's a remediation and prioritization problem, and I'll come back to that. So what changed to collapse that window? The paper is direct about it. Frontier AI models that can now detect previously unknown vulnerabilities at large scale. They walk through the evidence. Mozilla found and fixed 271 vulnerabilities in one Firefox build while testing a Frontier model, over 10 times more than the prior build found with the previous generation of models. In its first month, the same class of model surfaced more than 10,000 new high and critical severity 0 days across around 50 partners. Cloudflare found in 2,000 bugs, 400 of them high or critical in a single month. And here's a detail that matters for most of the defenders. 95% of those AI surface vulnerability disclosures had no public advisory at the time of the research snapshot. They were not visible in the National Vulnerability Database, not in your CVE feed, and not in the sources your program is built around. This is the AI cyber capability curve I've been tracking, and now a bank is drawing it. I framed it on this channel as an attacker needing an API key in an afternoon while a defender needs a quarter in a steering committee, and the gap is not closing. Nicholas Carlini put it even more bluntly, that current models are already better vulnerability research than he is, and within a year they will likely be better than everyone. The mechanism is the part people underestimate. Writing an exploit from a known vulnerability and its patch is largely a mechanical process. The paper cites red team work turning a known flaw into a working privilege escalation exploit in under a day for under $2,000 with zero human intervention. This is what I meant when I said each patch becomes an exploit blueprint. The patch diff is tutorial. Now the part of the paper I was most glad to see because it's the part the industry keeps underweighting, open source. Modern software is mostly assembled, not written. The paper cites that 96 to 99% of commercial code bases contain open source components and roughly 77% of the underlying code is pre-built open source libraries. The average commercial application pulls in around 1,180 open source components, and that ecosystem is held together by volunteers. More than 18 million open source packages list just one maintainer. That's 55% of all packages depending on a single person. I've written about how 60% of maintainers are unpaid and 61% work alone. These are the people the paper says are now expected to handle the tsunami of patches coming out of an AI advisory. The dependency math makes it worse. Most of your risk is not in libraries you chose. A typical JavaScript project on GitHub has around 10 direct dependencies and 683 indirect ones. And 95% of open source vulnerabilities live in those transitive dependencies. This is the Attack Surface Exponential. You cannot patch what you do not know you are running. Then there is the poisoning. Sonatype identified more than 450,000 malicious packages in 2025, and the single largest category was repository abuse, attacking the build and distribution process itself rather than the source code. The recent Axios-style attacks work exactly this way, going after maintainer credentials and package pipelines instead of the code. And the patch gap on open source side is measured directly. In the paper's own dashboard of AI-discovered open-source findings, only 75 high and critical items were patched against 530 reported to maintainers. Tuskera found AI vulnerability discovery outpacing patching by 16.5 times, even with 90% maintainer acknowledgement. Now, I want to be fair here, because a paper with 4 horsemen on the cover and the word Patchmageddon in the title is leaning into the alarm, and I've spent real effort pushing back on exactly that framing. Volume is not the same as risk. I wrote a piece called Why 70,000 CVEs is Less Scary Than It Sounds. CVE counts are exploding, up more than 40% year over year, with GitHub alone now publishing 1 in 5 CVEs. But a lot of the surge is 25 years of human debt finally getting found. Once you filter what is known in the known exploited vulnerability catalog and score it with EPSS, genuinely exploitable risk has stayed close to flat. The paper itself notes that only 1.5 to 2% of disclosed vulnerabilities get exploited in a given year. And breaches rarely end companies. I looked at the Verizon breach impact study and the real price tag on breaches. The median insured loss from a breach was about $83,000. Adrian Santabria's work tracking companies actually destroyed by a breach found only 25 to 32 that generally ceased operations, despite thousands of incidents a year. The recycled statistic that 60% of small businesses fold after an attack does not hold up. So hold on both of these at once. The discovery acceleration in this paper is real, and I believe it, but the answer is not to panic about raw accounts. The answer is to measure exploitable risk and build for resilience. Where I think the paper earns its alarm is the tail. A coordinated hit on systemically important providers, a grid operator, a clearing utility, a major cloud backbone, is generally different category of risk than one company getting ransomed. That is a scenario worth taking seriously, and that is where the concern is best aimed. Come back to that 60% number. The breaches where a patch already existed. That tells you the bottleneck is not knowing. It is deciding what to fix and being able to fix it fast enough. Organizations can only remediate somewhere between 5 and 20% of their vulnerabilities in a given month. If you cannot fix everything, and you cannot, then prioritization is the whole game. This is why I've argued that we're watching the death of CVSS as a basis for federal policy. The new binding operational directive, for example, moves agencies off of raw CVSS severity onto stakeholder-specific vulnerability categorization, which weighs whether something is actually exposed, actually in the CAV catalog, and actually automatable. The result is a real triage. Roughly 1% of vulnerabilities land in the highest urgency window of 72 hours. More than 60% can be deferred to normal upgrade cycles. Research showed that using CVSS severity alone to pick what to fix is about equivalent to picking vulnerabilities at random. The paper lands in the same place from the enterprise side. Their line is that companies will need to start evaluating themselves on speed, not just accuracy. And when they update software, I would put it this way. In the exploitation era described from DBIR, defenders are measuring response in weeks and months while attackers measure it in hours. Closing that is a prioritization and automation problem before it is a tooling problem. So what do you actually do about it? Let me give you the practitioner takeaway, and it lines up closely with the 10 actions JPMorgan's own technology leadership team published in April. First, point AI at your own code before someone points it at you. The same models finding these vulnerabilities can propose the fixes. The paper's core epiphany for developers is exactly that. The tools that detect and exploit can also remediate. Claude Security, GPT 5.5 Cyber, and Codex Security work all exist to do this now. If attackers are running it against you, running it against yourself is not optional. Second, know what you actually run. Maintain a continuously updated inventory of hardware, software, and cloud assets, and map your major SaaS and open source dependencies. 95% of your vulnerability risk is in transitive dependencies you do not choose, so you cannot manage what you have never inventoried. Third, optimize change management for speed. Shorten your patch testing and deployment timelines. The paper is blunt about over 80% of security professionals have delayed patching to avoid disrupting the business, and 61% of incidents involved an unapplied but available patch. That is a process and a culture problem, not a knowledge problem. Fourth, assume the patch will not always land in time and architect for that. Segment your networks, move towards zero trust, remove standing privileges, and harden default configurations. These are the controls that hold even when a specific fix is late, which is the paper rightfully emphasizing this point. Fifth, treat resilience and your people as strategy. Stress test your incident response and recovery plans against a scenario where discovery is machine speed and remediation is not. And take burnout in your security function seriously, because attrition there is a direct operational risk. I've made the case that we have to shift from risk elimination to risk management and resilience, and this is where things get concrete. A few things to watch, because this does not slow down from here. The capability is going to spread. The paper estimates a Chinese open source model with these capabilities from cybersecurity within 6 to 12 months and cites an analysis putting 40% chance by February 2027 and close to certainty by the end of that year. Once these capabilities are freely downloadable open weight models and jailbroken variants are already circulating, the barrier to entry drops for ransomware crews and hacktivists, not just nation states. Then there is the physical layer. Operational technology stays in service 10 to 18 years, and the paper estimates only 55 to 65% of industrial network hardware may even be patchable. The median time from disclosure to public exploit in industrial control systems is already down to 24 days. Some of this infrastructure simply cannot be patched, which is why resilience, not just patching, has to be the frame. And watch for the policy scaffolding. The Gold Eagle Initiative Clearinghouse meant to stage open source patches to critical infrastructure before public disclosure, launched in July under Executive Order 14409. At the same time, the information sharing liability protections that let firms share threat data are set to sunset September 30th. Faster sharing is becoming more necessary as the legal footing gets shakier. Here's what I keep coming back to in all of this. When a bank publishes a 30-page paper called Patchmageddon, complete with 4 horsemen on the cover, the thesis I've been building through Vulnpocalypse, the capability curve, the Attack Surface Exponential, and the exploitation era is not a niche security take anymore. It's mainstream financial risk analysis. The core of it is simple, and it's not going away. Discovery is moving at machine speed and remediation is still moving at human speed. AI closed the attacker side of that equation first, and the defender side, the prioritization, the patching, the inventory, the workforce, the policy is all still catching up. Where I part ways with the horseman framing is the panic. I do not think this ends most companies, and I do not think that counting CVEs is the right answer. I think it rewards the organizations that get honest about exploitable risks, that build for resilience, and start measuring themselves on speed. Having watched this curve bend for over a year now, my concern is not that we lack the warning. The tornado siren is already going off. My concern is whether we move in the 15 minutes we have. Full paper and my related articles linked below. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.